Hey, Cedric, we are live. Welcome to another session.
Silvan, it's been a while. Good to see you.
Same here. So yeah, due to the technical difficulties that we had with one of the tools that we used on Wednesday, we postponed the session to this afternoon. Glad that we can still make it happen because we're going to talk about a super interesting topic about your decision-making framework. But before we dig into that, tell us a bit more about how you've been lately. In 6 weeks, you're becoming a father. The lockdown is still ongoing. So what has Cedric been up to over the past weeks?
Yeah, no, it's quite a few things have happened. I think it's probably been almost a couple of months since we last chatted. Obviously, the two of us were in touch in between, just offline. I spent about 4 or 5 weeks in Portugal, which was a pretty great experience. The reason to go there was mostly to meet with the local startup ecosystem. I'm pretty long on the Portuguese startup ecosystem right now. I think it has great momentum. There's a set of companies that are now being sold that produce this like second generation of entrepreneurs that come out of it. There's government funding. And then also I think it's still a pretty great place to live, like good cost of living compared to what you get out of it. Beautiful places, but also with Lisbon and Porto, two very international cities, good universities. So I spent quite a bit of time there meeting with startups and people in the ecosystem, founders, investors, VCs, business angels. Other than that, we've gotten back, I think, about 3 weeks ago now. And yeah, you already mentioned it. Now it's the final countdown to when our life changes. Elena and I will soon be 3 people. Our little baby girl is going to be born in about 5.5 weeks from now. And obviously, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about what change that will create in our lives, how we're going to deal with that. But then also, I think that the most dominant feeling right now is just that we're super excited about this new adventure.
Wonderful. Yeah, we are curious to then also see videos and blog posts of you, how life as a parenting entrepreneur or investor will look like. Curious to learn more about that in 5.5 to 6 weeks.
Me too. So let's see. Yeah.
So yeah, today's session, we actually said that we're going to talk about how to make decisions. So just for everybody listening or watching to this, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them in the comments so we can pick them up in the session today. And also, yeah, the first question for you today is, what was the last decision that you recently made?
Well, I think I probably make hundreds of decisions each and every day, but most of them are kind of automated or at least don't seem to be big decisions. The bigger decisions that I make almost every day are when to invest in a startup, what to say to a startup, and kind of assess how to go forward. Because I think there's the two extremes. There's the cases where it's very clear for me to say no to, because either the space is not a fit or the stage or anything else. And then there's also cases where I'm immediately completely captured by the entrepreneur and the idea. And so it's easy for me to clearly see that we want to go forward. But there's lots of in-betweens. There's lots of cases that either my head says, yeah, go with it and learn more about it. But my gut says, maybe this is not right, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And because these decisions, sometimes it's quite hard to make these. And I'm lucky to have a team around me now so that I don't need to shoulder all these decisions by myself and don't need to lose my sanity over it. But they do take energy. Making decisions takes a lot of energy. And that's why I'm also trying to be very conscious about which decisions I actually do make and I consciously attribute energy to, and which decisions I just outsource or avoid at all.
So in the end, it's also a question of prioritization, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's things, and I obviously like thinking about or choosing what you're going to wear today doesn't take the same amount of decision energy as deciding who you're going to marry or whether or not to have a kid or which startup to invest in. Mm-hmm. I think they have different weight, but still, like I feel that like if every day I had to decide what to wear, that would also add up over time and kind of equal one of these larger, more important, in my worldview, value system, more important decisions. And so that's why the way I try to categorize these decisions is like four stages or four categories of decisions. Number one is decisions that I can avoid. And one example for that would be what I'm wearing today. I only have one or two outfits. And so every day I wear the same thing, either with long trousers or shorts, and whether with a jacket or not, but like that's all kind of automated. Mm-hmm. And then the second type of decision is decisions that I also feel I can, they're not essential to my well-being or to what I want to do with my life. And so I outsource them. I either give them to someone on my team. We have this rule that if you can solve a problem with $100 or less, then you just go for it. You don't even ask for permission. So that's like the second stage, where I try to give the people on my team an idea of how I think in general, and I give them the freedom to act within certain bounds. Mm-hmm. The third type of decision for me is decisions that you can rationally make. So you have some data or you have some experience, and based on that, it's pretty clear which is the next step forward. And then the fourth type of decision, and that's what I'm trying to save all my energy and time for, is the decisions that require both my brain as well as my gut feeling and my heart. What I've learned over time is that for every important decision in my life, I've needed both. I've kind of needed to think about what are the consequences and how does this fit in into the grand picture of life. And at the same time, I also just need to be in it with my heart and my gut. And that's what I'm trying to optimize for, having as much time and energy for those big decisions that require both.
Very nice. I think the first two decision types that you described, they are pretty clear. So you don't take them at all. You avoid taking any decisions, or you outsource them. But the last two that you mentioned, I'm curious to hear more about, when you realize you do have to face the decision, how you then actually go about the whole process of finding the right outcome, finding the right decision, then actually also making it. Because also, especially for the last one, that can be quite a process, I imagine.
Yeah, so what helps me is that for the second last one, so let's call those rational decisions, meaning mm-hmm. There are decisions that we can dominantly make with our brains. For those, usually writing helps me. I just sit down, I write down the facts. I might use a decision matrix, or whether explicitly or implicitly, I think about like the importance of different dimensions, and then I weigh them and I sort them, and based on that, I can usually make a decision. So that's usually one that I can make alone and by just writing and reflecting. For the last type, and let's call those emotional decisions. Mm-hmm. What usually helps me, if I'm not in either camp where it's a clear no or a clear yes, because then it's easy as well. But if I'm somewhere in between, what usually helps me is to just reflect with other people, to either someone on my team or in my personal life, to let them know and kind of do a brain dump, just let them know how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and what's going on in my mind. And based on that, have a discussion. And sometimes it resolves quickly. Sometimes it's as easy as a 5-minute talk. Sometimes it takes an evening. But in most cases, I need to sleep over it. And then the next mm-hmm. morning, I kind of reassess where do I stand, and then take steps from there. And I either iterate or I come to a conclusion.
Do you also write your thoughts down, or how do you process the information? You mentioned you talk to other people. That helps you to get other perspectives or to get additional information. But what do you do with that information? Do you write it down somewhere? How do you process it despite just sleeping over it?
Mm-hmm. Well, so typically at the point where I do present it to others, I have probably written about it, or have at least taken some notes. Mm-hmm. And I've given them a rundown of where I stand and the options that I see. And then I listen to them and I see what it does to me. Okay. And then usually there's not like 10 of these at the same time, right? Usually there's like 1 or a maximum of 3 that I have in the back of my mind of these. And so I don't really need to take notes in order to remember what we've discussed and what my options are. But sometimes I opt to take notes, just to also kind of tell my future self how I felt in a certain situation. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but sometimes, especially with these harder decisions or more emotional decisions, like I tend to ponder over them for like weeks. And once I've made the decision, like it seems so clear to me, and I don't understand how I could ever not have had that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's very surprising.
Yeah, if you experience it the same way.
To a certain degree, yes. So I also tend to, to then just ponder over the decision and not make it and always postpone it. But very often the gut feeling or the decision is actually already within you to a certain degree. At least that's the way that I feel. And what really helps me there is I should pick up that habit a bit more often again, but I used to really write a journal entry in my Evernote like every evening, just to reflect and also write down what's really keeping me busy and where I probably should make a decision. And then just by writing out, sometimes it's like 2 or 3 pages long if I do really write down the thought process and finally just sit down and think about what I want to make a decision about. And that really helps me to sort of listen to what's probably already in there in form of a gut feeling or anything of that sort, just to write it out and get really that clarity in mind. And then you also feel, oh yeah, actually that feels right. So let's do it that way. So journaling is something that's really helpful for me to process the information and the talks available, and also listening to what my subconscious mind probably has already processed.
And not to go on too much of a tangent, but you triggered something in me when you said Evernote and journaling. Because I think for a couple of weeks now, I've totally fallen in love with a new note-taking app, Notion. I don't know if you've ever used it before.
Yeah, I have, but the desktop version, and that wasn't too stable. So then I switched back to Evernote.
Ah, interesting. So let me quickly share my screen. I just want to give you a...
Sure.
Let me see if this works. So content here is not so important, but basically if you look over at the left side here of the screen, I've started to write basically an operating manual for both myself as well as my company. We have a lot of thoughts about my family as well. And it starts with like high level stuff of like, what are my principles of how I make decisions and how I see life in general, how I like to get things done. We have a similar type of page for the company, like why do we do Tomahawk? What is it that we stand for? Who's on our team? What are their responsibilities? And then all the way down to like, I have this list of internal processes here where, let's say, adding a deal flow opportunity to our CRM, and I can click on it. And then it shows you what is the goal of this process and what tools do you need at which page. And then we also included a video, a loom of me going through the process. And that's something that I absolutely love about Notion. It's just this depth that you can add, where before on Evernote, of course, you could add like web clippings, but where you could link to like a loom video. But what I really like about Notion is that it's all in one place. And it's just, for me, it makes a lot of difference that I also have this on my desktop. It's cached. You mentioned that on your end, it wasn't that stable when you last tried it, but for me, I've actually had a great experience with it. Plus you can add emojis everywhere, which is always a big plus for me. True.
Yeah. I also think that, these are different use cases. So the journaling, that's just something I do for myself personally. So there, the tool doesn't really matter too much. I could also do that in a Word document. But what I see here, having sort of like a collaboration tool with your whole team or also other people outside of your work area, that's like a real killer feature to organize it the way that you do it. And I think that looks super cool. People are probably going to email you to ask for a copy or templates that you can provide them with.
They can just ping me on Twitter or any of the socials. And I think we're pretty close to open sourcing some of it. Nice. I think overall our goal is to open source everything that we internally do, everything that we document internally, we want to make public at some point. Because I do think it helps us, but it also helps every entrepreneur when they think about how do we think. And even if they're not specifically talking with us, it might still give them very, very valuable insights on how to deal with other investors and how to go about the process with them. So,
right.
Yeah, just reach out to me and I'll put you on a list and I'll share some stuff as it becomes available.
Awesome. There's just one question from Ali. He asked for the name of the tool again. Maybe you can just quickly spell it so they can actually find it.
Oh yeah, of course. It's called Notion, Notion.
Awesome. Hope that helps, Ollie. Otherwise, leave another comment so we can send you a link to the tool. So yeah, getting back to the decision-making framework, what else helps you? You said like you also talk to other people. When do you actually do that? When do you make a decision solely on your own without actually consulting with other external people? How do you handle that resource?
So I think personality-wise, I tend to think that I tend to internally do a lot of the processing. So I tend to think about stuff a lot before I talk about it. And I think I've gotten better over the years because I've also had this experience that it has often helped me gain clarity much, much quicker than before. Like one very helpful resource for me was Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, which is this global network of entrepreneurs, but you meet in a local, what they call forum of 8 to 12 people. You meet once a month, and every time one person presents and the others, they give experience shares. So it's not about advice, it's about experience shares, and that's what's so powerful about it. So some topics that were in the back of my mind and occupying 30% of my CPU for like days and weeks, once I finally wrote them down and presented them and then heard what the others had experienced, not just what they thought would be the right thing to do or any advice they had to offer, but actual experience share where they were in a similar situation and how that had turned out, how they reacted to the situation. That was extremely powerful for me. And I think at that point, it became a lot easier for me to accept that that is probably the right step for me pretty early on in the process. Now, I still catch myself every now and then mulling over a problem or about a challenge for too long. Luckily, I also have Elena, who's great at like getting me quickly and giving me feedback and just asking really good questions for anything personal or business related. Plus, of course, a lot of friends. And then also in my team, we are very open. So independent from whether it's personal or business, if there's something that's occupying our mind, we talk to one another about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not only helped us grow closer, but it's also helped us move forward quicker and be more aware of how everyone is doing on the team.
Got it. You also mentioned Elena, your wife. So I'm also curious to understand in what way do you also like discuss the business topics and business decisions at hand with her? And in what way might that even be counterproductive? If it's a rational or an emotional decision, are there any differences between the two decisions where you involve her more or less?
So I'd say both. Although what I found over the years is the rational decisions are usually easy to make. So it's more of a, hey, this is the way forward that I would choose. Do you see any, am I making any mistakes with that? Is there something that I've overlooked? With the emotional decisions, it's tougher because also sometimes it's hard for me to find the right words and the right time. So one thing that Elena and I do is we have a bi-weekly on Sunday evening that we usually reserve for the two of us, where we spend like a couple hours updating one another. And we use a format that I've also I was inspired by EO, where you do this monthly update, where you tell one another about the best and worst 5% or the best and worst one experience for 3 areas of your life: personal, business, and family and friends. And so we do the same with one another to give each other an update on where we stand and what we've gone through. Obviously, often, because we're very in tune, like often we would already have a sense of what has happened. But then there's also times when, for example, when I was traveling a lot and we didn't see each other often, or even now when I'm just very busy and in calls until late night, and she might have already gone to sleep. So she doesn't see that something's bothering me. That really helps, giving each other an update on where we stand emotionally and what has moved us emotionally the last couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And then we have a bunch of questions that we answer for one another. Some of it is logistics, like have we booked any travel? Has anything come up that the other person needs to know in the next few weeks? But also, what are some of our higher level goals? What is something that we want to achieve this year? And the status update, and where do we stand in regards to that? What have we done since the last time we talked, and what are some of the challenges we're observing with that or encountering with that right now?
But you really do have like your structured questions and ask the same questions like every check-in you do, basically. Okay.
Yeah, and one thing that's great about this is that it gives us some time and space to come back to topics that might be a bit heavy. So I don't know if you've made that experience, but for me, sometimes maybe there's something that I observe in the moment, and I'd like to give feedback to Elena, but I know it's not the right time. Maybe we're not alone, or I can sense that she's already stressed, and vice versa, obviously. And then it's kind of, you need to create, what I've learned is that you need to create a moment where it's easy to come back to that. Because otherwise you might notice it, not be able to mention it in the moment, and then time passes and it happens again. You realize again, you're not able to mention it. And over time, it kind of builds up. And especially if it's something that's bothering me, right? It might be hard for me to ever bring it up because the only time that I think of it is in that moment when it's the worst time to mention it. And so having this like time slot every couple of weeks to just sit down and speak your mind and ask any questions that you've collected since the last time is a great opportunity, because we're both relaxed in that moment. We know that the other person only wants the best for us. And so that's been a safe space that has worked really well for the two of us.
Nice. Maybe just a quick interruption here. There was one cool comment on YouTube. Your camera setup is killing it. And I think also you made the decision to buy a new mic that we can see in your screen. So how do you make that decision to come back to our core topic? Because that's not like a very emotional decision, but probably somewhere between rational and a delegation that you can do.
Yeah, so where do I start? I mean, obviously buying anything permanent, anything that I keep, for me is always also a bit of an emotional decision, because I know I have to defend it towards myself and everyone that sees this. So I'll answer the first question, like what is the setup? So I use my DSLR. I have a camera where I also capture all of the YouTube videos that I do. It's a pretty simple setup on a small tripod. I have this camera, and I figured out a way to connect it to my laptop, use it as a webcam, even add the Tomahawk logo in the top right corner here. So that's been a good experience, and I didn't have to buy anything, but I've gotten more quality out of this, and I like it just because I spend so much time on Zoom, and nowadays that's the primary way for me to connect with others, that I thought it's the right, it's time well invested. Plus it allows me to go down the rabbit hole on something technical. Now for the microphone, this room here is very small, and it doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. Obviously there's no pillows or nothing that really dims the sound. And so it's been bothering me for a bit, because I want a better sound quality, and I have a microphone that I can put here, but still there's a lot of hall. And so I just recently made the decision to experiment with a microphone like this. It's basically 2 additional items, but at least now they've come out with something that has a USB-C plug. My goal is to not own any devices that are not USB-C, because then I can just keep 1 or 2 USB-C to USB-C cables, and I don't need anything else. So finally Rode has made one, this is literally the first try, so hopefully this is good. How did it go about that decision? So I gave that kind of as a parameter. It needs to be USB-C, and it needs to be so light that I can also travel with it. If I want to do an interview with someone somewhere else, like I need to be able to just throw this into my bag and use the same microphone for that. And finally, someone on my team found this, recommended it to me. I watched a couple review videos and decided to order it, and here we are.
Sounds like a very rational decision to take. So I'm also curious, when you do take decisions, sometimes you make a decision and then you realize, oh, actually there is new information coming up, or I made the wrong decision. So when do you actually, and how do you revert a decision that you've made in the past?
So maybe higher level, how I think about life and mistakes, right? Because having made a decision and then realizing it probably wasn't the best. Another word for that could be you've made a mistake. And I think mistakes are very valuable, right? You can learn a lot from making mistakes. And while I do think that smart men learn from their own mistakes, but wise men learn from others. And that's what I often try to do. I try to learn a lot by just observing others. We can't avoid making mistakes. Like, there are going to be mistakes. There's nothing wrong with that. The one thing that I do try to avoid is regret. And regret for me is mistakes that I make just because I haven't been conscious. For example, luckily my parents are still here, and no one in my immediate family has passed, especially during COVID. No one's been really affected, but I have a lot of respect of that moment where one day I'm going to wake up and I realize I have not spent enough time with a certain person. Mm-hmm. And I know that life can get very busy, and we all do a lot with our lives, and we try to push and do more and more. And it's easy to forget about what really matters and be conscious in the moment and be there for the people that need you. And so every now and then, for me, it's usually once a quarter, once every 90 days, I take some time to take a step back. Usually it's an afternoon and an evening to write about what is really important in my life, and to see if I'm aligned with my principles, if I feel like I'm in tune with my surroundings. So I write about 12 areas of my life, and I think we even spoke about this on an earlier show, so I'm not going to go too deep, but I write about how I feel in regards to friends, but also business, money, personal growth, fitness, health, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I think that helps me, that by itself, like creating that moment where I can be so conscious and can be aligned with what really matters and my values, that really helps me avoid regret. Hopefully will avoid me being regretful too much in the future.
Got it. There's actually a question that came in from Marvin Grass. So first of all, he loves your videos. And his big question is, how do you define, store, and evaluate your short, mid, long-term goals professionally and personally? I think you have quite a lot of experience in that regard. So what's your tip? What's your recommendation for Marvin?
Well, thanks a lot for the feedback, Marvin. Great to hear that they bring value to you. Now, in terms of how do I store and evaluate my goals? Well, I think high level, there's what I call the vision for my life, right? And the vision for my life is to help people create companies, or in other words, turn ideas into sustainable businesses. Because I just truly believe that that's the best way for all of us to change the world in a positive way, to affect other people's lives. And so my mission and my vision on this planet is to create as many tools and as much information as possible for others to successfully go through that process of turning ideas into sustainable businesses. So that's the long term, and I don't really need to store this anywhere because I'm very conscious of that, and it doesn't change ever, or it hasn't at least changed in the last probably 5-6 years. Now, when it comes to more short-term goals, something like I want to become more fit, or I want to get this company onto the next level, or I want to figure out what I'm going to do next year. These topics I typically tackle in 90-day increments again. So after writing about my values and where I stand in life, I also ask myself, so which is the one area that needs the most improvement? And then I visualize. And what I mean by visualize is, let's say I want to become more fit, then I'm not just going to say, okay, I want to go to the gym more and I want to eat less, but I'm going to sit down and make a schedule for the next 90 days. I'm going to carve out time in my calendar for when I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to carve out time for when I'm going to have dinner. I'm going to think about how I'm going to structure my meals and when and how I'm going to have my meals, how I'm going to make them. So I go down the rabbit hole in this one specific goal. And by the end of this process, I have a pretty good idea of how it's going to happen. What is the way there? Not just reaching the goal, because that usually for me is the least interesting part, but building a habit of getting there. And what I realize is that after 90 days, once I've gotten accustomed to a certain change in my habits and in my life, I can then also continue without much of a mental burden. And so I can far exceed my goals often. And past those 90 days, I don't make this particular area, let's say fitness, my main goal anymore for the next 90 days. It might be something business related. Maybe I want to hire an additional person on my team, or I want to create an extra business or something like that. And still, I'm going to become more and more fit because I've gotten accustomed to a habit that helps me continuously improve every single day. Like one thing that's always very impressive to me is if you only improve by 1% per day, you're going to improve 37x over the year, so 3,700% over the year, which is crazy, right? And it sounds like 1%. You can always do 1% better the next day. If you're well rested, you're always going to do one more push-up. You're always going to run an extra 100 meters. You're always going to be able to write 100 words more, or be a bit better at producing videos. Mm-hmm. And so I try to, I think for a lot of the mid and long-term goals, the way I implement them is in a process and not as a goal, but I just try to improve every single day.
Nice. There's actually also a good question, not directly related to that one about the personal goal setting, but focusing on the company decision-making. So let's bring it up right here. So Tobias asked, how do you make business decisions democratically, hierarchically, or any other framework in your companies? What's your best practice there?
Mm-hmm. So for a lot of our decisions, so I try to think about what is most efficient, right? Because for some decisions, it's really important for me that everyone has bought in and everyone is on the same page and everyone's been part of the process. For example, like an example could be, what is the name of your company, or what tools do we use? Because I want everyone to buy in. And I should preface this with, we're a very small team. We're less than 10 people working on a daily basis. There's only 3 people in the core team. So it's easy for us to have discussions among 3 to 10 people. But for these decisions where I really need everyone to be bought in, we make them democratically, or I would even say we all want to get to the same opinion before we make the decision. So it's a lot more debating than voting. And then we also define responsibilities, areas where one person takes the lead, and then we also trust that person. So I'm not going to question my employees or my colleagues' decision. If he owns legal, for example, on a certain case, then I'm not going to question that, or we're not going to have to debate and discuss every single step of the way. Usually after a project or after a certain time span, we might come back and say, let's debrief and let's see what went well and what didn't go well. And what's given me a lot of trust over the years is that, so we do a lot of feedback. We write a lot about what we think, how we've done, and then we also give feedback to one another. And what I see is the more used you get to that, it helps to be more aligned. So very often, everything that I write down that I want to give as a feedback, I already hear from them when they talk about how they've done in the last 6 weeks or so. So that's been very positive in general, to get aligned and to not have to do things twice, day in, day out, because I can trust that we're aligned on the high level principles, and the people I work with can execute within those boundaries that we set when we discuss them.
Makes sense. Thank you for the question, Tobias. One thing that is also currently coming with you when making decisions is the uncertainty part. So how do you deal with uncertainty? If you want to do a rational decision, you probably not always have all the information that you need, as with buying a mic where you can just check the specs and make a comparison. How do you deal with that uncertainty to still make a good decision when you face uncertainty, you don't have all the information you need? Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would probably say, even when you feel like you have all the data, right? You can never know everything in regards to anything nowadays, because there's so much to know. Like something that's always very humbling for me is when, like, almost every week I hear of a new fund or a new venture initiative somewhere in Switzerland or Germany. And I feel like I've been in this space for 7 years now, and I should know a thing or two, but still, like, apparently it's just things have grown too big to know everything and know everyone. So coming back, one of the principles that we have at Tomahawk, and it's also something that I apply in my personal life, is data beats experience and experience beats opinion. What we mean by that is if we have data, we go by data, and that has the highest priority. So we don't mix. So if there's clear data, for example, indicating that a button should be blue and not red, then we're not going to debate whether it should be blue or red. We're going to accept the data. Second, experience. And by experience, I'm coming back to what I said about EO and forums before. This is very different from advice. So this is not an opinion. You should be doing this or that, or I think we should do this and that. Experience is, hey, I've been in a very similar situation, and that situation we chose option A, and it led to situation B. Okay, and then we try to abstract and we take that into account. And especially if things have worked out back then, we're very likely to go the same route and not debate whether we should take option Z this time. And then third, opinions. And I'd say for the most, a lot of decisions just require opinions and gut feeling. And there, what we do is we just talk about it, and we see if one person can convince the other. And actually, that's something that we've also started to do for fun. So every Friday in our team, we do a few fun things, among them trivia and KPI review and a few more things. But one thing that we do is we try to have a debate every now and then. So I mention a question, and then I ask who wants to be pro and who wants to be contra. Then we take 3 minutes to write down arguments, and then it's go time, and we try to win, whether we get convinced as part of the process or not. We try to be good debaters, and that's something that I just find fun as well. And it's good to practice for lots of situations in life.
Absolutely. And something that is often not really taught at school or university, because there you are just passively sitting there, and it's a one-way communication, but debates are always a two-way communication channel. So that's a good practice to have there. So I have one more question here coming from Ebbe Flut. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. So do you have a specific structure in the feedback loops of your team is the question, because you talked about that before. So that person is interested to learn more about how you actually structure the feedback loops with your team, the regular feedback loops that you have in place. Mm-hmm.
So we do it every 6 weeks right now, because we feel that is a good rhythm for us. And it depends on, so if I'm writing feedback about myself, first of all, I try to quantify it. I give a star rating between 1 and 5, and I write a quick comment about why. Then I write down what was my highlight, what was my low light in the last 6 weeks. And I write about what do I want to improve within the next 6 weeks. And I write that down, and I tell it to others so that it's public and I can get some accountability. And the last question is, so what do I want to change and how am I going to change it? So again, there's this visualization part. So that's what I do for myself. And then for others, we use a very simple framework. And the reason why it's so simple is that we can quickly do it and we can focus on what's most important. And the framework is start, stop, and continue. So start, I'm going to write down things that I want you to start. Stop, very simple. I'm going to write down things that I want you to stop doing or thinking or a certain habit. And then continue is things that I want you to do more. And why is this important? And why don't we ask for, like, okay, personality-wise, how did I perceive you? And then competency and all that, because I think it doesn't really matter. If it's not top of mind, if it doesn't come up during those 3 questions, then it's probably not worth giving feedback. The problem that I often see is when you have these like big feedback papers or forums that cover like 5 to 10 different areas, everything kind of feels like it it had a similar importance, which definitely is not the case in real life, right? Like there might be one thing that's really bothering me, and it might not even fit into one of those schemas because it might not be something that the forum asks for. But I've just felt that start, stop, and continue covers everything. So I can tell you what I think you should stop, what you should start, and what you should do more. And that's it. We write down. If there's only one per line, that's fine. If we collect 5 to 10 things per start, stop, and continue, that's fine as well. Then we take time. Sometimes we do it via video. Sometimes we also do it when we sit together and we can go for dinner afterwards. And first, I would listen to what the other person has written about themselves, what they want to change, how they want to change that, and so on. And then in second order, I give feedback. I tell them what I've had on the start, stop, and continue. They take notes. Then we post it to everyone in the company, so everyone always knows what other people have discussed. So it's very transparent, especially what the takeaway was. And then that's it. And 6 weeks later, we repeat the process.
Nice. I like that. Simple, but sounds like it's a very efficient structure that gets you to where you want to go and really kick off that personal and also professional development. So that's a really cool structure. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about in today's stream is also your recent decision that you've made of not taking or accepting any scheduled calls. So that's also a big decision to take. And I think you framed it as an experiment to just see what happens if you do that. So please talk a bit more about what led to that conclusion, to that decision, and how you actually enforce it and how the first feedback and experience is going so far.
Yeah, so I think I only started it last Sunday. So it's about a week old. It's a baby experiment still. And what's led me to that decision was over the past 4 or 5 months, I often, in the evening, I felt kind of frustrated and I didn't know why. Because on the surface, everything was great. I was very efficient. Sometimes I did like 12 to 14 calls in a day for multiple days in a row. And with all interesting founders, inspiring stories, great partners, lots of team calls as well. But in the evening, what frustrated me, and I've realized this over time, is that even though those calls were important, they were not the most important thing at that point in time. Often I felt like, okay, now I'm done with everything that was scheduled and it's 8 p.m. And now I get to the stuff that really matters today because my portfolio founder needs my help and he's doing a fundraise, or he wants me to talk to a developer that he's thinking of recruiting and hiring. So I realized over time that it just wasn't the best way for me to go about this. I had previously made the decision that I didn't want to manually schedule calls. What I mean by that is, when I get introduced to someone via email, or if we had an email chat, we say, yeah, let's have a call. Previously, I would have sent like slots that worked for me and then waited for them to get back to me and try and find something and then finally put that in the calendar. I thought that was totally inefficient, whether it's done by me or someone on my team. So I've used services like Meetingbird and Calendly, where people can just automatically click on slots and book my time. But that's often led to like extremely full days with calls. And while all of those calls were important, I also realized that they weren't as important as what would have been the most important thing to get done on that day. And so I just made the decision to trust a bit more in, let's say, destiny, that if there's someone that I need to talk to, I will talk to them one way or another. We'll find some time by just spontaneously finding time to talk. And second, I had a few standing calls, check-ins with my portfolio founders or some teams that I often check in with. And even though it was only 6 or 7 calls per week, that already added about a call per day that I felt not always as efficient, and it was not always as important as what I could have done with that time. And so I thought a lot about how to communicate that, because it's not, especially for the standing calls, it's not, I didn't perceive it as easy, because I'm not 100% sure on whether it's the right thing to do or not. So I just wrote about it, and maybe I can quickly screen share again.
Sure.
Let me see if this works. So here's the page in Notion where I wrote about my decision. So there's a bit of background on why. There's also, I thought about high level, like with what I want to do with my life, like should I be on all these calls or not? And I realized that I need time for what's most pressing, to be there for the founders that need me. And so I've decided to go on this experiment and not have planned calls for the time being. And then I've also created this FAQ section where I try to think of, if I was sitting on the other side and I heard that Cédric is going to cancel my call, or he's not going to take any calls anymore, or at least not scheduled calls, what are some of the questions that are in my head? And then I try to answer them. And I think one of them let me see. Yeah, for example, this one I've added within the week now. So that was a good question that someone asked me, like, hey, but I have something that it's going to take me ages to write about it. What should I do? And I said, send me a voice message, and that's important as well. I still do make exceptions, right? I don't know where I say it here, but it's not that I'm not having calls. I'm just having less scheduled calls for the time being. And I don't schedule calls like 2 weeks in advance. Either we can chat within the next couple of days, or then maybe we'll just try to find a new time to talk when something else comes up, and we'll try to be asynchronous for the meantime and just give each other updates this way. And if you're asking me how has this gone so far, I mean, I feel very positive about it. I've got no negative feedback so far. I've had quite a few calls this week, but a lot of them were scheduled spontaneously. So there was a portfolio founder that pinged me on Slack and said, hey, I'm thinking about how to structure this and that for the next few months. Can we quickly talk? Or there's another portfolio company that's in a very interesting phase right now. And it's interesting for me to check in with them on how things are going, and vice versa, for them to have someone as a sparring partner. So we talked a lot, and the fact that I didn't have a lot of scheduled calls in my calendar this week has really helped make more time for these more spontaneous encounters and provide value.
And I mean, these things, they always pop up, right? And then it just adds an extra time of stress if you have your full agenda with all the calls and cannot really make spontaneous time available. Then you literally end up working until late at night, and that's probably not always the most satisfying feeling.
Yeah, and the one thing that I've also realized is that if you write things down, often you're much closer to the answer. So for example, like before, maybe we would schedule a half-an-hour call to speak about, I don't know, the compensation scheme for startup A for new hires. And on the call, you would have led me through like your thoughts and your deck and your structure and everything. And now what I've seen is that instead of that, you just send me 3 paragraphs and you send me a Google Sheets that outlines how you see compensation going forward and the sources that you've used and the math that you've used. I look at it for 5 minutes. I send you 3 questions and that's it. So I think we can also get a lot more done. We can better document it, and also gives me time to think, right? Because I can now sit down and I'm not on the spot where I feel like, oh, you need an answer from me right now, and I'm just going to say the first thing that comes to my mind. But I can actually sit down and spend 20 minutes looking at the spreadsheet and think about whether or not I think it makes sense, and give you much more valuable input. That said, I mean, there are topics where I think it is very important for us to be synchronous, to see one another, ideally in person, but also via Zoom or some other way. Right. So I think I just want to be more flexible in how I communicate, where I think for the past few months, it's become like, okay, anything that we need to talk about, it's going to be a Zoom call. Now I want to make it, by default, it's asynchronous. But if there's a reason for us to be on a call, of course, I'm going to make the time and we're going to get on a call.
So I think that's also the perfect answer to the question here about what you prefer. It depends, but in general, if it's possible, the asynchronous way of communication is probably more productive and more time saving in that regard.
Yeah, and maybe one last thing, like one thing that I've realized about asynchronous communication is that often what I've produced now in text is much easier to duplicate. So I put it in our wiki, I make a few abstractions, And so the next time someone approaches me, I don't have to pull things out of my cuff, but I can just briefly send them like a collection of experiences that I've made over the past and give that to them as an inspiration. So I think it helps me give better advice or share more value, and at the same time also be more efficient with my time.
Very nice. So if anyone out there still has an open question for Cédric, it's the last chance to write them in the comments now so we can answer them. And maybe, also just a quick thing here from my personal experience. It's also these meetings, they can easily suck up so much time where you just meet with people. I hear that from friends, from colleagues every now and then that work in large corporates. Not that necessarily all the corporates need to do it that way, but many do, where they just have weekly update calls with 60 or 80 people in a Zoom call. And either they are like not really present and do like emails on the side, or they are just listening to an update that would have easily been to digest in a written form, in an email, in a Notion page whatsoever. And will probably have just saved everybody a lot of time, and you could do it whenever it fits you perfectly instead of interrupting your day. So these meetings really think about what's the goal, what's the purpose, can it happen also in a not present way, in an asynchronous way, or do you really need to be present to make discussions and decisions together? So I think that's a good food for thought to take away from the discussions right now.
And so, if we have a few minutes left,
sure.
It'd be interesting to turn the table as well and kind of ask you, like, what are some of the bigger decisions you're either currently contemplating, or what are some of the bigger decisions you've recently taken, and what were the frameworks you've applied, the steps you followed, the things that you've learned?
I think a lot of stuff happened a bit more unconscious than you did it with all the documentation part. But one big step that I took, for example, was the decision to get self-employed again. So to found my own company and do all my projects through my own company. And that was just for me, I really reflected on the values, and what's super important for me is the flexibility, the freedom and independency. So I want to be able to decide when I want to work on what, and have the flexibility to also, stock up or reduce projects however I feel about them and however much I can actually contribute. That always depends a bit. So in that regard, that was like a big decision, but that was really very much driven by my own feelings and values, and therefore super clear for me. It just took a bit of time to actually execute it the right way. But in that regard, that was like more of a rational and also a bit of an emotional decision combined.
And you said it took some time to execute it. Does that mean you, like, in your gut, you always knew that was the next step for you, but you just didn't attend to it or process it? Or was it really just the administrative part of, like, you had decided, but it took X amount of days or months to create the company and all that?
It was both, but in the beginning, clearly the first point. So there, I knew that this was the direction I want to go for. But, sometimes I think that's a very human thing. You just try to avoid conflict or whatsoever. And then you just don't, you think, oh, no, I can actually talk to them about that next month or next week. And then you just postpone it longer than actually necessary. And that's just the thing that I did there. And also the quick learning, hey, that's actually not a good thing. Reflect on that, learn from it, and do it better next time. That as soon as you have the feeling, the decision is clear, execute it as fast as possible. Everything else will not help you, and also will not help the other people around you.
I think also probably because you were changing an existing behavior, right? Because you had employment, you were embedded in a company at the moment, and changing that. I think we're all creatures of comfort, and so changing what we're used to, I think, is sometimes hard. Has there been anything that you've taken away from this to make it easier with the next big decision, be it in business or personal, from this very recent learning?
Yeah, for me, it's really like, as soon as you do feel that this is the right decision to take, and you actually literally made up your mind and your decision, then that you try to have as little time as possible between the decision and also the communication and actual execution. So for me, that's just like, I knew that I want to go down that path, but I just didn't really enforce it in a fast way. And I think that's really the takeaway. Reduce the time between communicating and making the decision, because it's not going to change anything, but it's more of a psychological burden that you carry with yourself.
And maybe a very personal story that I can share that you just reminded me of was being in prior relationships where, especially for my last relationship before Elena, I knew for several months that it was not going to work out between the two of us, but I definitely knew with my gut and my heart that it wasn't going to work out. But in my head, there was still this, there's a so-and-so probability that this will still turn around and we're going to be happy again and this is going to all work out. Have you ever experienced that you tend to trust a rational scenario that is very unlikely to happen? Because like as soon as I was out of that relationship, like I was like, I could have made this, like it was a clear decision. Like not a single moment have I looked back and said, oh, this was so wrong. I appreciate everything all the time and all the experience that we've gone through together, but it was time for us to part ways. And basically every day that I stayed in that relationship, did I keep her from meeting the right person for her, and I kept myself from meeting the right person for myself. So I was just wondering if you had similar experiences in the past, be it in personal or professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. I can really heavily relate to these feelings. And I had a project that I was working on at the beginning of the year. And then also just realized, I think that was around March, April, that, hey, just the direction and the focus is not really feeling good for me. And there it took me about 2 weeks to really reflect a bit on that. But then the decision was clear. And then I actually executed super fast. Like I talked to them, said, hey, this is not working for me. We have to part ways. And then also freed up more time and space for other things. I really love the project. I love the people behind it, but it was just not a good fit because of the different perspectives on things. And then it took me, I think that was actually way faster than the first thing, just 2 weeks to think about it after the first signals came up, make a decision. And then really, I made the decision on Friday noon or afternoon. And on Saturday morning, we had the chat, made the decision and executed. So that was like super clear. And also felt completely right. So I never regretted to make that decision. Although they were great people in the great project, it was not a good fit and therefore the right thing to do.
I think we can pick up one last question because I thought it was an interesting one. Let me see if I can do this. Can I just?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, here we go. So Felix asked, have we ever used a coin to trigger a hidden gut feeling? And I think what he's saying with that, have we ever tried to delegate the decision, the actual decision, to something as, like, you could see the coin as destiny, right? When you throw it often enough, at some point it's going to say head or tail. Do you feel you've ever used that? Have you ever used some like outside help to make a decision? Let's call it that way.
Yeah, actually, yes. It was actually like also a skill that he trained then. I think they call it bioresonance testing or anything of that sort. So what you actually say, it's like an assumption where you say your body has like all the information it needs. You just need to read the signals the right way. And what you then do is you move your heads together like that. And there you basically either they meet in the middle or they are a bit above or below each other. And that gives you like the signal of the body, whether it's a yes or a no, or it's an equal or like indecisive. And that was actually something a friend of mine started like practicing that and doing a lot of education, that part. And I just thought like, yeah, let's go to him. That was about 5 years ago or so. And just test things, learn more about yourself and what your body is telling you. And for me, that worked very well. I think it's very individual, but for me, this is a really cool method of double checking or also getting information out of your body and subconscious that you wouldn't access otherwise. So in that regard, yes, absolutely.
And so the theory here is that if your brain knows that if the right hand comes out on top and your gut already says, I want the no scenario, then in that case, your hand will actually end up the right hand on top, and it's going to help you make the decision.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I haven't experimented with that, or I'd say I've never or at least I don't remember off the top of my head right now, ever had a situation where I just tossed the coin or tried to in some other form or way delegate the decision to randomness, or I mean perceived randomness, right?
Sure. Yeah. Nice. So I think we're all the other questions that we have, they can probably find more information on your website about investment proposals and what projects you invest in. So please have a look at the Tomahawk.VC website. And yeah, Cédric, it has been a lot of fun again, as always, with you to chat about what's keeping us busy, what's on our minds. And I always look forward to the next session that we'll hopefully have in a shorter break in between, maybe even before your daughter is born. I hope that we can still have another session then.
Let's do it.
Then,
yeah,
of course,
great.
One afterwards to hear how you're doing and how your life is changing.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Anyone that's listening or watching right now, leave comments for what kind of topics you'd like Silvan and me to discuss. After the last session, we decided to always have some sort of a key, like a word cloud or a keyword that we're going to discuss, so we're not jumping all over the place as we tend to do. So please leave some hints for us for what you'd like to listen to or dive into. And yeah, my pleasure, Silvan. Always good to see you and chat with you. And hopefully we'll see each other soon in the gym.
I hope so, Cédric. Yeah, thank you all. And if you want to listen to Cédric's podcast, feel free to also check it out on Swisspreneur.org. And of course, all the cool videos that Cédric has on his YouTube channel. Have a great weekend, everyone, and see you next time. Thank you, Cédric.
Cheers. Thank you.